You're watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. From Toronto, Ontario, I'm Samia Sayed. Welcome to the show. Coming up is an interview with YUSUF Faqiri regarding a gross miscarriage of justice. That is the case for his brother, Soleiman Faqiri. But first, let's take a look at the headlines. Advocacy groups pleased with New Democrats' new position on Palestine. Fears over lack of protection of local journalism at CBC. Canadian spy accused of smuggling British teenager to ISIS. Jewish Google worker quits amidst fears of supporting Palestine. And now the details. The National Council of Canadian Muslims, or NCCM, is calling on Canadian Muslims to send a letter of appreciation to Jagmeet Singh, leader of the New Democratic Party, for his position on the Palestine conflict. In a tweet posted yesterday, NCCM says it is pleased that the NDP has come forward to condemn the illegal settlements and demolitions and for demanding justice for slain journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. NCCM says that it has been pushing for human rights change along with many allies, and now is the time for all leaders to demand justice for the Palestinian cause. Friends, a media advocacy group, has filed an appeal with the federal government asking the cabinet to review the broadcast regulator's recent decision over the terms of the Canadian Broadcast Commission, or CBC's, license renewal. The organization says the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, or CRTC's, decision threatens Canadian public broadcasting. Friends specifically wants the CRTC to review CBC's new marketing division, Tandem. Tandem prepares branded content for corporate clients. In November last year, 70 former CBC employees also petitioned the CRTC to review Tandem. They argue that paid content jeopardizes the integrity of public journalism. A Canadian spy is accused of smuggling 3 girls to the Islamic State group in Syria in 2015, according to the British public broadcaster. Shamima Begum, who was among the smuggled girls, is seeking legal help to challenge the removal of her British citizenship. She is currently in a Syrian detention camp. Begum's family alleges she was a victim of human trafficking that the Canadian spy aided, report the British media. The spy allegedly exchanged being an ISIS informant for Canadian citizenship. In a news conference Tuesday, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau did not deny the Canadian government's involvement in the operation. A Jewish Google employee has written a letter saying she is leaving the company allegedly because of fear of retaliation for support of Palestine. Ariel Coren accused Google of, quote, complicity in violations of Palestinian human rights. Google has a $1 billion contract with Amazon and the Israeli government and military. In a letter addressed to colleagues, Coren accuses the company of retaliating against her and other employees who spoke out in support of Palestine. She says Google ignores employees who wanted to live up to its ethical principles. Coren describes herself as a Jewish Google worker on Medium. That's it for the news. Now, in 2016, Soleiman Faqiri, who had been living with schizophrenia, died after a struggle with jail guards at Central East Correctional Facility in Lindsay, Ontario. Just recently, the Ontario Provincial Police announced that they will not be laying criminal charges against the correctional officers involved in this case. Soleiman's brother, YUSUF Faqiri, is joining us now to give more details on the matter. Welcome, Brother YUSUF, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Brother YUSUF, I very briefly went over some of the circumstances around your brother's death, but can you add some more details? What exactly happened on December 11th, 2016?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Soleiman's story, first and foremost, for everyone that's listening, is a story that every single one of us across this country have a stake in. That a man with a mental illness was killed under government care. At the time of Soleiman's death, according to Ontario Coroner, he had 50 bruises on his body at the hands of the guards. Both his legs and his hands were tied. He was pepper sprayed and he had a spit hut. All of the bruises and violence was given by the guards at the Central East Correctional Center. Yet almost 6 years after his violent murder, the Ontario Provincial Police decided once again not to press charges against the guards who killed Soleiman Faqiri.
Now, I did not mention before is that the Ontario Provincial Police's announcement came, as you said, after the report of the chief forensic pathologist, which said that it was the officer's actions that led to Soleiman's death. Can you expand on what exactly the report included and what it concluded?
Absolutely. So for years, my family and our supporters across the country fought to change the original pathology report, which said unascertained. Last year, in August 2021, the chief pathologist, Dr. Michael Polanin, took over the case on a new review of the pathology report. And he directly linked the guard's actions into Solomon's death, effectively saying that Solomon died as a result of the guard's actions. Yet, and it was after that report that the Ontario Coroner's Office sent the case back to the OPP for a third time. This was the third police investigation, with all the compelling evidence. As I mentioned, the bruises and the violence that Solly had on him. You had an eyewitness whom the OPP called a credible witness. You had a jail guard that admitted that they did not follow the ministry's protocols when it came to the spit hood. Yet the OPP, remarkably, astoundingly, sent an email to my family in what was a calculated email saying that there was not sufficient evidence that a criminal act took place into Solomon's death. And we have to ask ourselves this fundamental question as a country is, what does this say about the system when we effectively have essentially a two-tier system, one for us Canadians and one for law enforcement in itself? And that's the part that's really important, that we should be alarmed. My late brother's story is a story that should alarm all of us, not just because of the Faqiri family or Soleiman, but when a system is intent on creating a two-tier system, it's a fundamental issue. And it was this example of the case where Canadians continue to lose faith in the justice system.
Mm-hmm. And I will be asking you later about the institutional system, but I want to first say, what was your reaction having heard of the OPP's decision?
You know, for more than half a decade, my family has fought publicly, through pain, through anguish, to reiterate the violent end of my late brother's story, Allah yarhamu. When I got that decision a few months ago, my emotions was filled with anger, with anguish, with shock, but not surprise. And for me, it broke my heart to know that my brother's story, in many ways, even though we fought so much, in many ways it was seen as as if like his story didn't matter, as if people with mental illness, even though they have so much vulnerabilities to begin with, that their lives are viewed as cheap. Because Soleiman was more than just his illness. He was a son. He was an intellect. He was a gifted athlete. He was my nephew's and niece's uncle. He was my brother. But all of this to say for me was as if my brother's story didn't matter, as if his life was cheap. The OPP sent this in an email saying to my family that they did not press charges.
In that case, then, what does accountability look like to you?
You know, I want to highlight this part. Accountability, the system in itself operates in a way where accountability and transparency, these are foreign terms within the system when it involves law enforcement. That is to say, when a family that has fought for almost half a decade for getting answers into their loved one's death, yet we still don't know in all of the 3 police investigations what the police really did in their investigation. So accountability will never be achieved if first transparency isn't articulated. And if transparency is articulated, accountability has to be achieved through this sincere, authentic way where we have one system for all. right? And accountability for my family. And let me be very clear. Soleiman's death, nothing will replace Soleiman. Nothing. He's gone. He's not coming back. But give the family the dignity and the honor and the decency of doing the right thing, that something wrong happened here, and not letting the people that are involved into his death get away with murder. They need to be held into account, criminal accountability for what they did to my late brother. Because if today was Soleiman, who's next? If today was Soleiman Faqiri, who's next? But accountability can never be achieved if it's not authenticated on a sincerity of holding individuals into account when something wrong has happened.
Mm-hmm.
And my family will continue to fight.
Mm-hmm. And it's on this note of changes for other people. You mentioned institutional changes specifically regarding mental health training in the prison systems. What changes are you advocating for?
You know, let me be very clear. What you articulate about mental health training, it's one part of transforming the system. I don't say reforming the system. Transforming the system is one part of his mental health. But we must go beyond that. We must ask ourselves a question about is how can Canadians have faith and trust the system when the system operates away from scrutiny and accountability? How can the system be seen as credible and legitimate when the system has two different standards for itself? And the system will never, ever be transformed or remain accountable by itself. The system has to become accountable and transformed outside of it. They can't transform themselves. And this is what we have to ask. The reform of the system begins, or the transformation begins, at the political level. It has to begin by Canadians, by and large, across this nation, of saying, you know, we need to change the system. The police will not change the system. Law enforcement will not change the system. We need to have institutional change led by civilian oversight. That's where the reform starts. That's where the transformation starts. But the system will not change when it operates away from scrutiny and accountability, when its intent to create a two-tier system. And I keep repeating this part because we as a society, as Canadians, by and large, we're very proud of our institutions, and we should be. But what this 5 years has showed my family is that institutions that remain insular, or that remain in a way within its own insular view, will not change. Mm-hmm. And they can't change on their own. They have to change by the people within this country.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Brother YUSUF, and for your perspective. It was a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you so much.
You are watching Canadian Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. That's it from our Toronto studios tonight. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more Canadian Muslim content. Stay safe, and until next time.